Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Lauren, this is an awesome event. Thanks to everyone coming out. Full disclosure, I'm not a real estate agent. Like Jared mentioned, I did some hard things. Great, but if you're married, you have kids, you pay your taxes, and you have a profession, you've also done hard things, so there's not a lot of difference between you and me. Some of the things that I've learned, I'm going to share with them. If it's helpful, great. And if it's not, feel free to discard it. It's been helpful to me, and I like to share it. So one of the things we're going to talk about is resiliency. So we're going to unpack that. And I feel like the SEALs get a lot of publicity these days, so we're actually going to tell stories. I'm going to tell them about naval aviators. Also throw in a story about an Air Force aviator for Dom's sake. Just a little shout out to the Air Force. So a lot of stories. We're not going to have PowerPoints. You guys are likely PowerPoint out, and I appreciate that. I do have slides, though, if you want to see them. So with that, I'm going to break out some terms just so we're on the same page. We're going to talk about grit, hardiness, and resiliency. So when you hear the word resiliency, a lot of times those three words get lumped together. And so if you look at grit, this is, think pre-event. So grit, the academic term coming from Dr. Duckworth over at University of Pennsylvania, is passion and perseverance. So what are you passionate about? Therefore you can persevere. Essentially it's your why. So you've probably heard that. There's a lot of books on what's your why, a lot of social influencers, what's your why? That's grit. That's pre-event. So why did you become a real estate agent? Why did you get married? Why did you choose to live in Covington? What are you passionate about? Those are all factors that play into your decision making, whether cognizant, like deliberately, unconsciously, there's something there that you can unpack. Maybe Dom can help you with that too. So then you fast forward to the event. So this is hardiness. So hardiness is actually a pretty awesome term. It's really lost in our lexicon today, but there's a bunch of subsets, and I call them the 3 C's. So you've got challenge, control, commitment. All 3 of these C's added up is courage. So when you look at challenge, this is you're in the event now. You're like, all right, I'm stressed out, something's bothering me, and for a lot of you here, I'm talking to Jared and Lauren in advance of this conference, like what would be helpful here? Like, there's this lawsuit coming out, NAR, a lot of real estate agents may not know what's happening. There's a lot of ambiguity out there. And so that can be a stressor for a lot of individuals in this room potentially. So we can take that as an example. All right? What's challenging you there? And then with that, are you being overcome by events, or are you taking the offensive and actually overcoming it? So that's challenge. You're being faced with it, and you have a decision. You have agency. You can have a bunch of emotions. Emotions aren't bad. Every human has them. And it's how are you going to regulate those emotions and then choose your response, like Don was talking about. You have agency in this situation. So that's your challenge. Commitment. Or let's talk about control first. So there's a bunch of things that are outside of your control all the time. And it's okay to just highlight that. Like, what in this situation, this lawsuit, can you control, and what can't you control? Well, there's like a bunch. If you control, okay, I control this, I can't control this. There's a bunch in this column that you can't control, and understand that, and that's okay. But the things that you can control, are you actually moving out on those? That's really important. And I think the distraction there, when you're stressed out by events, we can look at our processes and we can go, all right, there's a lot of things that are stressing me out right now about this decision or this event, so I'm going to do a lot of small things that actually have no bearing on an outcome or actually are not helpful to the overall objective, when I should be doing the 1 or 2 hard things that can actually make traction in my business. That's the challenge right there. That is the temptation for any industry, any professional. When you're overcome by events or you're challenged and you're looking at an event that stresses you out, we immediately want to distract ourselves as humans. We don't want to do the hard thing and look at reality and say, okay, what can I do right here? What can I control other than my attitude, my mindset, and my agency? And that's on you. And that actually takes you to reflect on and then you to take action. So this is way easier, I appreciate that, to talk about than actually do. And then the last thing is commitment. So you have a stressful event, it's coming down the path. Let's say summer, you're going to get some findings on the NAR lawsuit. Okay, the anticipation stresses people out. Like when I was going through basic underwater demolition selection training for the SEALs. We started with 200 plus individuals. We graduated with 30, 36 to be exact. A lot of the individuals that showed up were absolute studs and were physically able to make it through the training. They deselected themselves, and they didn't do it in the event. They did it when they were comfortable. They did it when they were well fed. They did it when they were well rested, and they were able to think about, oh, why am I here? And then they psyched themselves out before the event even started, like, oh my gosh, we just finished this really hard evolution. We just had a really nice lunch. Now we have to do more hard things. I'm out of here. And then they would quit quietly. But I might have saw like maybe one or two individuals quit under duress. Usually if you're in an event and you're moving out, no one's just going to walk away from an evolution and say, I'm out of here, I quit. Usually people quit when they're comfortable and they start letting the stress get to them. So just be aware of that. Because you're in a position right now like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Some of these things are out of your control. Just let it go. And the things that you can do, like research, maybe talk to Jared and Lauren, individuals at Arena, maybe some of the professionals here that are researching it, do your own research. Cool, do that, and then move out, and then adapt. So the control, commitment, and the challenge, all that is courage. And going back to the commitment piece, you got to tie back into your grit. Like, what are you passionate about? Why are you here? And why is this worth staying in the industry? Then you have resiliency. This is post-event. So this is resetting for the next fight. So whether that's diet, nutrition, working out, hanging out with family, friends, prayer, meditation, reading good books, etc., you can have your own list of what it is that you need to be resilient. Great. There's also a bunch of lists that you can do things that are negative to your impact, and that will actually make you weaker as a human being. You can overindulge in some of these things, pressure relief valve, and you're actually not improving your optimal performance. You're impacting your business in a negative fashion because you don't know how to respond in a resilient fashion. That's healthy. So these things I'm going to play out now in stories. So grit, hardiness, resilience. We're good? We're on the same page? Yeah? And we have slides if you're not. So then we go forward. How does this apply to real estate? Well, honestly, this applies to just being a human being. And my favorite way to learn is stories. And one of my favorite human beings is a guy named Admiral Stockdale. Vice Admiral Stockdale. He's a 3-star admiral. And for context here, I grew up in a small town in Southern California called Coronado, California. When you sell your next piece of property, I encourage you to go visit Coronado, California. It's more magical than Disneyland or Disney World. You've got the 3rd Fleet of the Navies out there. It's the home of naval aviation. You've got a bunch of jets flying over all day. And it's also the training ground for the SEALs. It's super patriotic. I love growing up there. And I also grew up with a lot of retired military personnel that decided that they want to plant the flag in Coronado. One of those individuals was a guy named Stockdale. So I saw this guy since I was a kid. The guy's an absolute hero. There's ships named after him. The facility I taught at, the Naval Academy, it was called the Stockdale Center. The guy is an absolute legend. A lot of people, have you heard of Stockdale, by the way? All right, he was a vice presidential candidate for Perot back in the day. When I saw this guy, I had a book that my grandparents gave me. He was signed by Stockdale, and he was the man. In my opinion, like the absolute pinnacle of what it is to be a military hero. So, I'm like, great, what did he do, Blair? So I'm going to tell you. This individual graduated from the Naval Academy in 1946. He served a couple tours on ships. Then he got his master's at Stanford in philosophy. He was a Stoic. So this actually plays in later. And Stoicism, if you're not familiar with that, that's basically a pursuit of virtue and the ability to live out grit, hardiness, and resiliency. So he's second deployment. He's in charge of a squadron of A4s. A4s are, if you saw the first Top Gun movie, this is what Viper was flying against Maverick. It's a smaller aggressor plane in the movie. So he was doing like a raid over the Gulf of Tonkin, gets shot down, and he gets shot down over North Vietnam. So this is early days. This is September 9th, 1965, like beginning of the Vietnam conflict. He lands and he shatters his left leg when he lands, super hard in North Vietnam. He gets rolled up and he gets taken to the Hanoi Hilton, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it in Vietnamese, but it's basically the prison camp for American POWs. He was there 7.5 years. And on top of that, he was the senior individual in the camp. So when you're senior, you have to take on all this responsibility. So he was doing Morse code to try and encourage all of the other airmen, the Marines, Air Force, Navy personnel that were in confinement with him. And because of that, he'd get tortured. He'd be sent to solitary confinement. In fact, he spent, I think, 5 of his 7.5 years in solitary confinement. Think about that, like by himself. So if you're having a hard day or you're stressed out about like, oh, what's going to happen with this lawsuit? Stockdale spent 7.5 years as a prisoner of war, tortured, alone, isolated in his own thoughts. And the guy was, I mean, we'll get into this in a minute, but one story just to like unpack his leadership and his resiliency in adversity. So again, there's a lot of retired Navy personnel that had been to Vietnam, and some of them were POWs that were shot down, that were old men when I was living in Coronado as a kid. And there's a story that was circulated in town where one of the junior pilots, so this is like a lieutenant junior grade, he was flying an F-4, he gets shot down a couple years into the conflict, and everyone knew at this point that Hanoi Hilton existed. And so it was like a real risk that you ran into as a pilot. Like, if I get shot down, I'm either going to die or I'm going to become a prisoner of war for who knows how long. So this guy gets shot down 5 years into the conflict, and he gets rolled up to the Hanoi Hilton. He knows what's coming, and he's absolutely melting. His constitution is failing him. They put him in war pajamas. They line him up against the wall. They're going to interrogate him. They're going to torture him. And then he's going to be, his fate's on him. So he gets lined up on this wall, and he can hear an American just getting wailed on. And he knows he's next. Like, he's going to get hit. He's going to get punished, all these things. And he's basically telling himself, I'm not ready for this. I can't believe this is happening to me. I'm not ready for it. And he just keeps repeating this mantra. Well, the doors open, and this individual can't walk now. So he's being dragged by 2 North Vietnamese prisoner guards. His face is black and blue, and he looks over, and he recognizes this airman as being part of the carrier. So he knew he was Navy. And if you're in the Navy, you've got what's called a sea tour and a shore tour. Sea tour is like, hey, you're deploying all the time and you're going to be out away from family. Shore tour is like you've got a 9 to 5 and it's like a gift. You're like, this is incredible. I get to have dinner with my family every night. This guy rolls out. He recognizes that this is another officer from the wardroom of the carrier, and he winks at him through his eyes, like black and blue, and he smiles. He goes, hey man, at least it's shore duty. And he rolled away. And the guys that was about to go in and get well was like, oh my gosh. This guy is still cracking jokes, with like, he can't even walk, he can't even see, and he's trying to encourage me in the midst of this terrible environment. That individual was Stockdale. Stockdale was still just like the man. Like, he wasn't ever defeated by the North Vietnamese. They called him, they like stopped beating him towards the end of the war. They're like, we're not going to get anything out of this guy. Like, he's just hard as nails. And Stockdale, like, just one more story about Stockdale. They had, like, they wanted to basically use him as a puppet. And they said, hey, tell the Americans how well we're treating you. Tell them how, like, we're the best. Here's a razor, go ahead and shave. He took the razor and he cut his wrist, cut his face. And they're like, okay. So they bandaged him up. They're like, you're still going to go in front of this camera. He's like, no, I'm not. And so they're like, hey, go shave this time. Here's another razor. Then he took a stool and he just beat himself out, like, so he's out cold, black and blue, so they couldn't be in front of a camera. Like, the guy was just the pinnacle of a professional in that environment. And when he returned, he gets promoted. You got to see this guy. He's got a bunch of medals. It's in the slide deck if you want to see it. And here's what I'm sharing all that for this point. So this, if you take anything from the story other than Stockdale's my hero, it's this. Like, how they asked him, like, Stockdale, how did you survive? Like, what was your secret to being an absolute stud in that environment? He's like, it was really easy. He's like, I looked at reality for what it was. He's like, a lot of people are like, oh, we're here, but it's okay. 4th of July, we're going to be out of here. Never happened. Then he's like, Thanksgiving. They're like, we're going to be out of here by Thanksgiving. I just know it. It didn't happen. Then Christmas. We're going to be out of here by Christmas. Then Easter. This cycle repeats itself for a year. Those individuals literally died of a broken heart. They died. And Stockdale's still going because he had to look at himself like, I might never see my family again. 7.5 years, 5 of them in solitary confinement. So he had to have that resilience to say, like, I can't control this. What I can control is my mindset, my attitude, and my actions. That's all I've got. And no matter who you are, like, no one can take that from you. No one can take your mindset. No one can control your actions but you. You get to decide that. So you can be stressed out, and there can be all sorts of factors at play, but ultimately, your response to stress is your response. You don't have to act a certain way in adversity. You don't have to go down a certain path. You might be like, oh, well, I'm stressed, so therefore, this is my emotion. I need to be a victim. It's like, no, you don't. That's your stress. Maybe you feel like a victim, but you can actually be a champion in that environment. That's your decision. You have agency. So let's move on to one more story here. So this is about a guy named Colonel John Boyd. Has anyone heard of Boyd? Yeah? Anyone else? All right, so one individual. What's your name? Chris. Good man. So everyone should know about Boyd, and you will at the end of this conference. So Boyd, this guy was arguably the best pilot the American Air Force has ever produced. Maybe next to your dad, Molly. But an absolute stud. He was actually recalled from the Korean War. They said, hey, look, you're an incredibly talented pilot. He wasn't even an ace. They recalled him just because they saw his level of skill was tremendous and outpaced all the other pilots. They said, look, we need you to instruct another cohort and the next generation of pilots. He's like, I don't want to. I want to just keep fighting. They're like, I don't care. This is military. We're telling you to go back. So he went to Nellis Air Force Base up in Nevada, and he was an instructor. So this is the equivalent of Top Gun for the Air Force. So you've got the best pilots rolling through, and then he takes them to the next level. So you've got a lot of cocky pilots in the room, and he's trying to teach them. And he realized after that first cohort, he's like, man, they actually didn't respect me at all. So he would start the second cohort. He's like, here's the deal. I'm actually a better pilot than you, and then I'm going to start teaching you. So like, you're not a better pilot than me. I'm the best pilot in my squadron. The Air Force sent me here because I'm the best. He's like, actually, I'm better. Let's do this. And he did this with every single student. He's like, meet me at 30,000 feet. Here's the bearing. I'm going to set you up for success. Go ahead and line up on my 6 in an advantageous position. And within 30 seconds, I'm going to reverse the position, and I'm going to have you in my 6. They're like, there's no way you can do that to me. 30 seconds is a short amount of time, and all these pilots are like, I'm the best pilot. But they all loved the challenge, so they did it. And literally within 30 seconds or less, Boyd would absolutely crush them. He's like, all right, cool. Go ahead and land and tell the next guy to get up here. So they just do this all day, crushing. And then the next day you show up, all right, guys, let's go through. And everyone was all ears. Everyone was paying attention because they knew he was the best pilot in the room. But they were also curious, like, how are you doing this? How are you the best pilot? He's like, it's also simple. And again, I'm going to share something that's simple, and I appreciate that the application is way harder. I get that. But he would look at me and say, look, I observe the situation. I orientate to the situation. I decide based on the seams and the gaps where I want to attack, and then I act faster and harder than you do. And I do that faster and harder every time, and it's easy for me. So what he observes, how he orientates, what he decides he wants to do, and how he wants to act, that's on him. And he called it the OODA loop, and he would just get inside that OODA loop tighter and faster than his opponent, and no one could ever beat Boyd. And he actually translated this into ground warfare with the Marines. We benefited from it with the SEALs. It's called maneuver warfare, which was actually the brainchild of Boyd. He's an absolute brilliant strategist. It's not common knowledge, but they actually think that Boyd was around Schwarzkopf in that first Gulf War where we defeated Saddam Hussein in 3 days. He, again, like just got inside that OODA loop way faster than the enemy. So how does that apply to real estate? Why are we talking about an Air Force pilot? Because the OODA loop, this idea of observing, orientating, deciding, and acting faster, is that it transcends all industries. So you're sitting here is like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? At the end of the day, I don't know. Like I told you in the beginning, I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm not a real estate agent. But you can go back to the basics of principles like how can you provide value to the client? And that's observing what can I provide? And then you're orientating, okay, I think it's over here. You're deciding that's the path I want to go. And then you act and you do that faster than the competition. Your book of business will likely go up. But you actually have to look at reality. And that's the hardest thing that a human can do. You're like, that's not the hardest thing. It is. Objectively looking at reality for what it is, not what you want it to be, is a challenge for any human. And then observing, orientating, deciding, and acting, and going down the path like a lightning bolt will serve you as a citizen, as a parent, as a spouse, as a real estate agent. If that's helpful, and I hope it is, great. And if it's not, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you discard that. I'm around, got my contact information, but I'll pause there and I'll pass you the baton here, Jared.